In this video, we will go over how to rewire the gas and electric brew commanders at the bottom of the controller. First, we'll start with the 240 volt. To begin rewiring the 240 volt electric brew commander, remove all black screws located on the top, back, and front. Be careful when removing the bottom housing, not to catch the wires on the inside. First, we will remove the 120 volt cable by loosening the gland connector and disconnecting the 3 wire leads as shown. Now this cable can be removed from the back. Removing one wire first will make this easier for the other two to fit out. Next, we will remove the male 240 volt power cable. First, loosen the gland connector and disconnect the 3 leads, one of which is a part of the wire nut. Remove the wire nut and separate the white wires. Loosen the screw on terminal 1 and remove the 2 black wires. Leave the other end of the thin black wire connected to the power switch. We've now disconnected the black and white wires from the male 240 volt power cable. We now have to disconnect the ground wire with a flathead screwdriver. Now that all 3 wires are disconnected, we can remove the male 240 volt power cable. Again, removing one wire first can make it easier for the other 2 to come through. Finally, we will remove the female 240 volt power cable. Loosen the screw on terminal 2 and disconnect the black wire. The ground wire should already be disconnected. Loosen the gland connector and pull the female 240 volt power cable out the connector. Disconnect the green wire from the power receptacle on the back of the controller. Disconnect the black wire from the power receptacle on the back of the controller. At this point, the power receptacle should be unwired. The temperature port can be removed by grabbing the nut and gently twisting the inside portion as shown. Once this is loose, you can remove the nut from the outside. We suggest reinstalling the nut back onto the temperature port as to not be misplaced. Be careful threading and unthreading this nut, as the plastic threads can easily be stripped. At this point, you can remove the plugs from the bottom housing and replace them with the gland connectors. If the gland connectors are too tight to remove by hand, use an adjustable wrench. Use the plugs from the bottom housing to fill the holes in the back of the controller. Once all the plugs are installed in the Brew Commander and all the gland connectors are installed in the bottom housing, we can begin wiring the controller out the bottom. Start by installing the female 240 volt power cable through the gland connector on the bottom housing. Leave the gland connector loose and push the power cable further than needed to give a proper working area. Install the male 240 volt power cable through the other gland connector while also giving enough slack. To make the installation easier, remove the power receptacle from the back of the controller. First, we will install the male 240 volt power cable to the controller. Install the black wire from the power switch and the black wire from the male 240 volt power cable to terminal 1. The female 240 volt power cable's black wire can be installed to terminal 2. Install the white wire from the 120 volt cable to the receptacle as shown. Install the black wire from the 120 volt cable to the board as shown. Install the black jumper wire onto the receptacle as shown. Install the loose ground wire to the receptacle as shown. Insert the sensor port with the nut removed into the hole on the bottom housing. and replace the nut to secure the cable in place. Get this finger tight, then hold onto the nut and tighten the back. Locate the 3 white wires and secure them together with a wire nut. Ensure all wires are tightly connected in the wire nut. Connect 2 ground wires to the right side and connect the other 2 to the left. It does not matter which ground wires are being grouped together. When installing the bottom housing, pull on the power cables to reduce the excess that will remain in the controller. At this point, all connections should be made. You can now tighten the gland connectors and reinstall the bottom housing. Be careful not to catch any wires between the black body of the controller and the bottom housing. Now we will wire the gas controller through the bottom. The gas controller and the 120-volt electric controller are identical in the wiring operation. Follow these steps for both controllers to wire them out the bottom. The first step is to remove all screws holding the bottom housing to the controller on the top, front, and back. Once all the screws are removed, set the controller upside down and gently remove the bottom housing, ensuring none of the internal wires get caught. Unwire the male 120-volt power cable by loosening the gland connector and removing the wire nut from the 4 white wires. Loosen the screw on terminal 1 and remove the black wire. You will also notice there is a connected black wire that runs to the pump relay. This will also need removed. Remove the ground wire of the male 120-volt power cable. Pulling out the white and green wires first will make it easier to remove the black wire. Run the end of the black wire through the gland connector. Once you have it fully through, pull on both wires to remove. Next, we will remove the female IEC cable, or if you're rewiring a 120-volt electric controller, it will be the female 120-volt power cable. Loosen the gland connector and remove the black wire from terminal 2. Remove the ground cables. Now that you have all 3 wires disconnected, you can remove the cord. Now we can begin disassembling the internal wires. Remove the ground wire from the receptacle as shown. Remove the temperature port by holding the nut on the outside and turning the body on the inside. We suggest to reinstall the nut on the temperature port as to not be misplaced. Remove the plugs on the bottom housing as shown. Once those are removed, you can remove the gland connectors from your controller. If they're too tight to remove by hand, you can use an adjustable wrench to loosen. Install the gland connectors into the bottom housing. Reinstall the plugs into the back of the controller. Now install the female IEC cable into the gland connector on the bottom housing. Install the male 120-volt power cable into the other gland connector. Leave both gland connectors loose to provide slack for making the installation process easier. Install the male 120-volt power cable's black wire to terminal 1. Connect the power switch's black wire also to terminal 1. Install the female IEC cable's black wire to terminal 2. The black wire coming off terminal 1 from the male 120-volt power cable can be connected into the pump relay as shown. Connect the 4 loose white wires together with a wire nut. Ensure that no bare wires are exposed and that the wire is securely fastened in the nut. Connect the 2 ground wires of the male and female cables to the ground terminals as shown. Connect the last ground wire to the other ground terminal as shown. Ensure both ground connections are not sticking out the side of the controller. Connect the temperature port to the bottom housing with the nut. Remove the wires of the receptacle in the back. Install these into the receptacle on the bottom housing in the same location in which they were removed. When installing the bottom housing, pull on the power cables to reduce the excess that will remain in the controller. Carefully slide the bottom housing onto the controller body and reinstall all screws.